my art, I'm Andrew J. Wroble, and we'll just fine art. That's how I reference myself in the business world. Art is actually, it jumped on me primarily when I was in the U.S. Army. It was a draftee, and so it was 1973. And luckily, I didn't go to Vietnam. They sent me to Europe. And in some time off, I went to a museum just out of curiosity in Venlo, Holland, a little tiny place smaller than this on a side street in Venlo, Holland. And they had a show of real Rembrandt drawings. And these were just very small, tiny little drawings in ink. And evidently, he would carry a vial of ink on his belt, and then he'd walk around in the villages, and when he saw something he wanted to draw, even if it was architectural or somebody sitting in the marketplace or some kids playing, he would break a twig off or pick up a stick or something from the street, and he'd just dip it in his ink and very quickly draw out these drawings. And that sense of freedom that he could do that with, I was blown away. And so it's kind of like, at that point I thought, if nothing else, in the rest of my life, I'm going to work to try to come close to doing that. I ended up taking a drawing workshop through the University of Minnesota under Judith Root taught the course. And it was the first time that I ever really started thinking of drawing as just mark making, as just an absolute expression of whatever you wanted to say. The University of Iowa was definitely profound. It jumped me to performance art at the time. I was able to look at drawing as a total life experience, and actually even carried that into the 80s, up into the 90s, in fact, where every moment of my life was considered another mark on the drawing. And so I did things in Montana as I worked as a cowboy. I herded cows so that I forced them to do things out in a field that would leave dew marks and stuff. I actually ran a calf camp where for a month you were out living with the cattle and you birthed them. And so for every calf that was born, I got a whole bunch of industrial silk, and at a campfire every night I'd sew flags. And for every calf that was born, I'd hang flags on a 5-acre paddock on the. So every cow at the end of the calving season, we had all these flags hanging around, and I had a boss that put up with me because I was probably one of the best. He made me his top hand, and so I was one of the best cowboys I think he probably ever worked with. Yeah. So he was very tolerant, but there's no photos. We had no cameras. I got $400 a month. They throw in some meat and gas. At the University of Iowa, I majored in printmaking, and one of the print processes that I loved was sugar lift, which was intaglio printmaking, where you're actually drawing with a sugar-based medium on a copper plate, and put it into an acid bath. The sugar is lifted away from other emulsions in the process, and you get sort of a broad sense of the subject matter you're drawing, rather than very specific linear elements. It was accidental at that point that I learned that you could actually do that by drawing on paper, simply by what you drew. Then you would wash it away before it dried, or at least all of it dried, and what washes away only left what was dried. So for years, 50 years, I've been pursuing that. Even inside of doing all these other things, that's how I really format my drawings. Depending on the time of the year, so that's based on humidity, a lot of large exterior impacts on it. that I can't necessarily control, or I have limited controls. Maybe now I bring in a hair dryer to get some heat to make other things dry, or maybe I've even used light bulbs where I try to get over, but you still not totally in control of what you do. The final step I do on all of my drawings, and it's very easy to do on the paper I work with and the material, but I wash it off. I literally have a garden hose in my studio and I blast it big time. And whatever's left is the finished drawing. So there's always a surprise. I don't feel it's magic. I don't feel like I actually did the drawing. When it's done, I can stand there like any other viewer. Whoa, either wow, this is great, or wow, it's not so good. A moment in hand is probably the way I look at any time I'm doing a drawing, because I definitely believe that it's an artist's role to be current to the times. It became very apparent in the last year with COVID, with the Black Lives Matter, some of the other social issues, world issues that have come up, and kind of concentrated our awareness of time. And it did me in particular as an artist, eliminated a lot of public access. So I'm just in studio drawing, and I thought it fit a moment in hand. In this show that's here right now, it progresses through the year. By the time you get to dates that reference the July period, they're starting to become an abstract version of trees, and color becomes much more bold. And so those kind of risks, I think, I'm mixing with. I also work on the last year or two on an Apple iPad and sketching tools, and that working on glass is starting to pull back into new changes. Start with trees. Because trees I've been working with quite a while. One of it is I'm a certified Iowa woodland manager. My wife and I own a tree farm, so just on the practical side, we have trees in our life. The way I draw is the exact same way a tree would grow. So it tries to move toward light, or it moves away from wind or anything. This is why I say I also draw air within my drawing. If you'll see, that subject of the tree also has all that air around it. And I think back, I see even in cathedrals, I think we kind of don't recognize that as a society or cultural now, but cathedrals are nothing more than a grove of trees and before those were first built, or mosques or anything, somebody was looking at trees, somebody was having a very nice spiritual experience in nature, and they carried that into an architectural format that fit their institution within a community. Now color starts to jump in, and it changes a lot of the format, because for years all I did was work with black India ink. And a few years ago, through a gallery in Colorado Springs, they asked if I would work with a client to do a certain blue that client wanted. And I go, well, sure, I'll try it. And when I started, one of my first thoughts was, well, I'm thinking back at Picasso's blue period, and how blue impacted all these different emotions just from what he observed in that time. And then I started playing with it, and it's not only what he left the world, but there's 1,000 other emotions that can evolve from uses of blue and variations. But the color actually gave me an infinite number of or more possibilities of discussions of emotions, storylines, whatever I want to go after, simply by mixed with that subject, just in whatever way I want to play it. So I'm fascinated by color now. If a viewer walked up, the first thing they're going to impact them is the whiteness or the absence of the trees, and it appears I'm just outlining with space. If you look at closely, you start to see it. So that one starts to work singularly with the concept that I like to call the presence of absence. You also see then within that there's another tree or another branch that's also interacting with it. When I do interactions like that, they'll be softer and in the background. An interesting way to my technique is, as I draw, the things that are going to end up further back in depth in the drawing are the last things that go on rather than the first. And that's just going back to me in that garden hose thing. Another nice thing that I like to take just a singular branch, and if you'll notice now, most of mine, they come off of the edge and they end up going away, leaving the edge. So I don't often, there are some landscapes, but I don't often anchor to the earth. I'm really attracted to what happens just sort of above me if I look up. And that one in particular has that dance that I see in nature. So when I do just a singular one, I can just use mark making, and I can go back to that interest in it and being enthralled with Rembrandt and that sense of freedom. How much freedom can I express? It actually says that's freedom. I want a viewer to say, that's cool. And so that's how I ended up jumping into what did I do to be so black and blue, which clearly identifies in this time frame that I was doing it with Black Lives Matter and that social movement that came out of it. It's something that I can think back in when I was in the U.S. Army. We had training at least once a month, and I'm still just floored that we don't get it right. I lived in St. Louis. I'm floored now that we don't get it right. So I don't know that I'm offering any kind of solution, but it's my way of offering at least some support and belief that we need to find a solution at some point. And I think it evolves into the final piece of it actually has two trees within the landscape that are anchored to the landscape. It has tastes of a traditional landscape. So within that realm of a drawing, I thought that was appropriate because we need to have some sense of a real landscape. We need to have some sense of partnership in dual purposes that come out of the landscape, and yet clearly understand that there's all kinds of bruising and colors around us that make us realize there has been some real pain come out of this period.